On the surface, the Israeli voting system appears simple and straightforward. But when examined under the hood, a very different picture emerges. However, before examining the ramifications, we need to understand the nuts and bolts of the electoral system. Representation in the 120-seat Knesset is based on proportional representation. The electoral threshold, which the political parties taking part in the election need to cross in order to achieve representation, is currently set at 3.25% of the number of votes cast in the election. The threshold has been raised only 3 times in 74 years. Initially, the threshold was 1% until 1988, then it was raised to 1.5% until 2003, when it was raised again to 2%, and finally in 2014 it was raised to 3.25%, its current position. The Knesset is elected for a 4-year term. On the surface, it appears to be simple and straightforward. However, it is in its simplicity and its attempt to appear inclusive that the fundamental instability of the system is entrenched and has been from the first days of the state. It was no surprise that between April 2019 and March 2021, there were 4 elections, none of which returned a stable government. Israel's voting method is simplified by the fact that voters vote for a political party and not specific candidates in a closed list system. On election day, and upon entry to a polling station, the voter is given an official envelope and shown to a voting booth. Inside the booth is a tray of slips, one for each party. The slips are printed with the ballot letters of the party, between 1 and 3 Hebrew or Arabic letters, and the full official name of the party in small print. Each party publicizes their letters prior to the election day, with most election posters featuring them. As many political parties in Israel are known by their acronyms, several parties can spell out their name in 2 or 3 letters, and thus use their name as their ballot letters, for example, Meretz. The voter chooses the relevant slip for their party, puts it in the envelope, seals it, and then places the envelope into the ballot box. The system is simple to use for those with limited literacy skills. This is especially important in Israel, where many new immigrants struggle with the language. Each party must register its chosen letters with the Israeli Central Election Committee, and certain letters are reserved. If a new party wishes to use letters from an older party, it must receive permission from that party. Examples of reserved letters are Machal for Likud, Emet for Labour, Shas for Shas. Voting is by paper ballot, and votes are counted manually before being entered into a computer system which is not connected to the internet. Israel does not employ electronic voting due to fears that elections could be vulnerable to cyber threats from those trying to influence the results. It is important to examine how, after 74 years of statehood, the fundamentals of the democratic system have remained so unstable. When David Ben-Gurion and his fellow leaders of the Yishuv were preparing for the creation of the State of Israel, one of the fundamental beliefs was to ensure that all the people of the state in waiting would be representative in the legislative institution which was about to be created. The only voting system which appears to encompass these principles, that to all intents and purposes had already been set up in the way the Yishuv, as the Jewish population of Palestine was called at the time, was proportional representation. This was particularly pertinent regarding the religious communities, including the Haredi communities, which were to be represented by their religious parties. In 1948, the percentage of Haredim in the population was relatively small. Hence, Ben-Gurion believed that the future secular character of the state would never be at risk. Fast forward 74 years, and one can immediately see the disproportionate amount of power the smaller parties, particularly the religious ones, currently wield. It is important to examine in detail both the structure and the development of the electoral system over its 74-year history. Constituent Assembly elections were held in newly independent Israel on the 25th of January 1949. Voter turnout was 86.9%. 2 days after its meeting on the 14th of February 1949, legislators voted to change the name of the body to the Knesset, translated as Assembly. It is known today as the First Knesset. Every Israeli citizen over the age of 18 is eligible to vote, but they must be present in the country to vote. Israel's basic law, there is no formal written constitution as there is in the USA, requires national elections for the Knesset to take place on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi, in the Jewish month of Cheshvan, early October through mid-November, 4 years after the previous election. More often than not, elections take place earlier, as very few governments see out their full term of 4 years. Citizens vote for their preferred party and not for individual candidates, although the list of individuals in order of potential election are published by the parties prior to the election. The system of voting has changed very little since its inception. There have been attempts to introduce modern technology, but as of 2022, nothing in the fundamental voting system has dramatically changed. Any citizen over the age of 21 may be elected to the Knesset except for the following: the President of the State of Israel, the two chief rabbis of the State of Israel, any judge in the judicial system so long as they still hold office, any dayan or judge in the rabbinical court system so long as they still hold office, the state controller, rabbis or ministers of religion while receiving salaries for such a position, and finally, senior state employees and senior army officers of such grades or ranks and in such functions as shall be determined by law. The President of the state is by and large a figurehead role, except regarding the forming of a government after an election. Once the votes of the election have been counted and ratified by the election committee, the mandate to form the government is in the hands of the President. Following consultations with the leaders of all the parties that have succeeded to gain seats in the Knesset, the President approaches the leader of the party most likely to be able to form a viable coalition. No party has won more than 56 seats, hence there has never been a government that has not been formed as a coalition with another party or parties. An interesting observation is the fact that the percentage of citizens actually voting in an election has dropped considerably since the first elections in 1949, as the following table indicates. Since Israel does not have a written constitution, the basic laws, Chokei Yasod, act in its place. The basic laws include many dealing with human liberties. Over the years, several laws have been added, the most recent being the state law, which was added in July 2018. According to Israel's Declaration of Independence of May 14, 1948, a Constituent Assembly should have prepared a constitution by the 1st of October 1948. The delay and the eventual decision on the 13th of June 1950 to legislate a constitution chapter by chapter resulted primarily from the inability of different groups in Israeli society to agree on the purpose of the state, on the state's identity, and on a long-term vision. Another factor was the opposition of David Ben-Gurion, Prime Minister from 1948 to 1954, and then again from 1955 through to 1963. This lack of decision was called the Harari decision. Thus, although on the surface the Israeli electoral system of proportional representation appears simple and straightforward, beneath the facade of simplicity lies an intricate web of instability which is extremely difficult to change.